These are famous Dolphin Square parties, and we'll also be naming the names that were in Geoffrey Dickens' report, the ones that have got lost. The Home Office may have lost them, but we haven't. I know Butler Slosh, she did Cleveland, let's get her.
What we all have to remember is it is not just this government. We have to go back to all the other governments. We've got to go back to Blair. There was a lot of shenanigans going on in the Islington case.
And Lambert.
And Lambert, Chris says. And many more. And many more, Chris.
Yeah. Bill, sorry, Bill. Blair was the one who orchestrated the close down of Operation Orr, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Chris, that you were putting forward.
Margaret Thatcher was given evidence as well.
Well,
right.
Margaret Thatcher was given evidence. Don't forget that.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget. I mean, if you're talking about the Elm Guest House, yeah, back in 1980, the raid was carried out in June 1982. Now, back in 1990, we knew for an absolute fact that on the 25th of August 1982, the Prime Minister had been given a briefing at Downing Street. It was her. It was back then they used to have what was called the Security Subcommittee of the main cabinet, which was Prime Minister, Home Secretary, and the Attorney General. They were given a briefing by both the Metropolitan Commissioner of Police, McNee, and the head of MI5. Now, at that meeting, they were briefed a full report on what had happened at Elm Guest House and the MPs and other people in high places who were found there. They were also told about the seizure of that tape at Dover from that Tricker guy, which contained a tape with Leon Britton and young boys in it. That
was a VHS tape.
Yeah, VHS. Yeah. No, and also about another scandal. Now, they've always denied that. But if I know somebody who has access to Mrs. Thatcher's personal papers, and the most noticeable thing, the only day in her entire political career that she took off was the 25th of August, 1982, where she had a hairdresser at 8 o'clock and a dentist at 6. Now, one of the key issues that came out over the weekend in the Mirror stuff was that former policeman and the former civil servant, who both say Mrs. Thatcher was briefed. That was that meeting. Mrs. Thatcher knew everything that was going on the 25th of August 1982, and she's covered up from then on, like they all did, because that's when this cover-up, certainly over Elm Guest House, and a lot of the MPs who were in the House of Commons, that's the date it all started from.
We also have to look at Tony Blair, Jack Straw, Gordon Brown.
You were saying about Jack Straw.
Seriously, I mean, seriously, Lou, we're talking about the Islington case here. We're talking about kids being brought out to Jersey. We're talking about what Chris and I have been trying to do.
The torture den in Lambert, the Lambert police station.
Yeah, the torture den. What Chris and I have been trying to do is to sort of, rather than smash it to the public, you know, because these are harrowing subjects, and it's not a horror film. It's true. This is true what has been going on. Children have been killed.
Yeah, there was a report the other day, I think over the weekend as well, about a witness that they found in America who did try to come forward back during the 80s, but now has fled to America and isn't speaking. Do you know who this guy is?
The only one I can think of is of course the son of Carol Kazir, who owned the guest house.
Elm Guest House.
He would have been about 10 when it was raided, so I gather, yes, he moved to the United States and he's running quite a successful business over there and has built a new life for himself.
Boys being procured and pool parties where members of Parliament, lots of members of Parliament and others, were walking around naked, all men, naked or just with a towel around them, and young boys as young as 14 would be dressed as waiters, you know, swim trunks and like bow tie, and they would be supplying the drinks. And then there were other kids, and then we're talking about going into parties where long corridors at tops of hotels, where the whole floor was taken up, cocaine in every room, young boys, film being taken, whoever was doing that.
Yeah. Can I just add to that, just to say something, that people talk about the Geoffrey Dickens dossier as if it was just one collection of papers that was handed over to the Home Secretary. That is not correct. Jeffrey Dickens in 1983 and 1984 in fact handed over 3 dossiers. The first dossier, which is the one that's currently the subject of all the hoo-ha in the House of Commons, was the one about the pie membership and exposing people in high places. But there was, a year later, in the Kincora debate in the House of Commons, Jeffrey Dickens got up and he actually talked about, never mind what went on in the past in Northern Ireland, he asked the Home Secretary, what are you doing about children in care currently being abused? Now, I've known from a couple of sources, and indeed Andrea Davis, as I think who's well known to you and your listeners, has confirmed it to me recently, that the children's homes to which Jeffrey Dickens was referring was the North Wales Children's Home. So the government, the Home Secretary, members of Parliament were well aware of what was going on in North Wales in the early 1980s. And what the victims were saying there, again, what Jeffrey Dickens tried to back up in a report he gave to Thomas Hetherington, who was the Director of Public Prosecutions, about the so-called Westminster 8. Those parties at Dolphin Square that Bill's talking about, children from the North Wales care home were being brought to London for these parties. That was the point Jeffrey Dickens was trying to make back then. And so people shouldn't forget, it's not just about one dossier. This is 3 dossiers they've managed to lose, spanning a period of 2 years. We were talking about the North Wales care home abuse. Who was it that set up the most infamous inquiry in the history of these inquiries, that obnoxious Waterhouse report? It was William Hague, the Welsh Secretary at the time. Who drew up the terms of reference for that inquiry? William Hague did. So you had Waterhouse turning round, telling the press, you're not allowed to report anything about any named paedophile in this inquiry.
There's evidence of Jimmy Savile doing it. We've got 2 young girls that have come forward saying that they was all robed up. I've got someone talking about rituals going on Jersey. Jack Straw made it illegal for any child in care that's been abused to put the story into the public eye.
There was a girl in a children's home who was raped, yeah? The member of staff, another member of staff, called the police. When the police arrived, they were refused admission on the grounds that they needed the permission of a High Court judge before they could interview the girl. It took 4 weeks for her to decide to call the police in. And as you and I and everybody else knows, any chance of getting any forensic evidence, blood or whatever, has disappeared after 4 weeks. All the bedding's been washed. And don't forget the Gillings report. Nobody has ever seen that. That relates to the same incident where they commissioned a report. The moment they saw the report, they thought, oh my God, because what Gillings did was name all the people. He talked about the infiltration of PIE into the highest realms of the social work profession, judges, law, even government itself. And they took one look at that report and ordered it to be destroyed. In 1981, this is the customs officer. In fact, the Sunday Express have got the guy on tape admitting, he saw the tape, there were young boys being sexually abused on that tape, and the guy in it was Liam Britton, who was then Chief Secretary to the Treasury. That was in 1982, they had that tape. There were a number of other tapes they had, and we believe that a couple of the 8mm tapes that were seized off him were possibly child snuff movies.
So, yeah, that's my comment. We absolutely can't trust the British government. It is a criminal paedophile government.
You had not just the British establishment there, but you had MI5, MI6 practically acting like pimps for both sides in Northern Ireland. I mean, that was the real scandal over there. Has never been got to the bottom of.
Bill, you mentioned the other day while the bombs were going off in London back in the 80s that people from Sinn Féin were actually at some of the parties. I think you mentioned that a couple of weeks ago on the show.
Sinn Féin is a party, but we're talking about IRA as well. He's a member of Sinn Féin, but he was also a member of the IRA. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, you've got to ask a question. In 1982, with bombs going off all around London, and I remember it well, you know, bombs were exploding in bins outside McDonald's in Oxford Street. Yeah. The Canary Wharf was being blown to bits. And we're expected to believe that you had a senior official of Sinn Féin, which is the political wing of the IRA, was staying at a gay guest house in Barnes.
Elm Guest House. And
nobody knew about this because I know personally, Carol Kazia told me, two things about Gary Walker. Gary Walker warned her the day before the raid that the raid was going to happen. And the other thing he offered to do for her was to get false birth certificates and passports for her and her children and get them over to America. So people are talking about the Jeffrey Dickens dossier, but there was also, I think all of us of a certain age remember Barbara Castle, MP. And people forget that in 1983, she handed a file in respect of Lord Carrington's involvement, not just because the international trafficking of children doesn't happen of its own. It's very much tied into the international trafficking in arms and the international trafficking of drugs. But she handed a file to the editor of a Bury newspaper, and Special Branch raided their newspaper's office, slapped him with a D notice, and seized all the files from the editor of I think it's the Bury Echo. Now, the point that was made by the journalist was the fact that it tied Carrington not just into the trafficking of children, but the trafficking of drugs.
But especially the making of snuff movies, which we believe are now still being made in abundance of children.
High definition handheld camera film.
Exactly. So it's so easy now.